Let's get started. So, welcome to the second New York Augmented Reality Meetup. I'm extremely excited to have you all here, and we have a really exciting lineup of speakers tonight. Hopefully, you'll get the opportunity to learn something new or meet someone new. If you see anybody that you find interesting on the Zoom list, feel free to send them a private message to facilitate a conversation, but make sure the message is private so you're not too embarrassed. Also, if we have some time at the end, we'll separate into breakout rooms so you'll be able to meet people there as well. The purpose of the group is to grow the knowledge and awareness of augmented reality by connecting and sharing knowledge with industry experts, consumers, and engineers from around the globe who believe augmented reality can influence their lives. Thank you so much for joining, and I'm so happy that you can all be here. So tonight's agenda, I'm going to start off with a quick introduction where I'll introduce the speakers and highlight some of the latest industry news in AR. Then we'll hear from Bar-Zeev. He'll be talking about eye tracking and the potential risks in head-mounted displays. Then Karl Guttag is going to discuss the state of augmented reality from an electrical engineer's point of view. And then Steinerman is going to discuss how PTC is powering augmented reality through LiDAR scanning. All is extremely exciting, and after each of the presentations, we'll have 5 minutes for a Q&A. So if you'd like to ask questions, just put the questions in the chat box, and I'll help moderate the conversations. Once the speeches are complete, for the remainder of the session, we'll head into breakout rooms where I'll propose a participation topic and you can meet some new people in the industry and facilitate new connections. And once again, if at any point you see anyone in the chat you'd like to say hi to, feel free to reach out to them and send a message. I'd love to have maximum group participation throughout the entire meetup so we can kind of simulate being in real person. And just to get a better feel for the audience, I'll be including a poll that I'd love for you to answer. And Jason will be throwing that on in a few minutes. So let's just go right into it. I want to start out by giving a shout out to Andrew Deutsch and his ARKit New York City meetup. They've been meeting since 2017, and they have a pretty awesome following. Andrew gave me the opportunity to introduce my group last Wednesday, and it was an excellent show. So I'd like to reciprocate, and I'll be posting a link to his meetup in the chat. If you could join his group as well, that would be amazing so we can help grow the AR industry together. He should be here tonight. I'm not looking at the list, but if you see his name, send him a message to say hi. So I'm super excited and humbled by the lineup tonight and extremely excited to hear the presentations. Thank you, Barry, Seth, and Jason Jaslow for helping me organize the event and speaker group. Both are wonderful people and experts in the industry, so please reach out to them to say hi. First, Bar-Zeev. He needs no introduction. He's been in the mixed reality space for over 20 years. In early 2010, he helped found and invent the Hololens at Microsoft, where he developed the first prototypes, patents, and UX concepts for the project. He built first prototypes for the developer-facing AR cloud while working at Bing. He worked at Amazon to launch Prime Air, as well as design the UX for the Echo frames. And most recently, Avi has helped Apple advance its own undisclosed project. You'll learn more about Avi during his presentation, and you can also follow him on Twitter if you'd like. Next, we have Karl Guttag, who's known as an engineer's engineer. Karl has 40 years of experience in graphics and image processors, digital signal processing, memory architecture, display devices, and display systems, including heads-up displays and near-eye display. For the last 35 years, Karl was the lead technical person at Texas Instruments, and he was also the CTO at 3 startups. Karl is named inventor on 150 issued US patents, including key patents related to augmented reality. Billions of dollars of yearly revenue has been attributed to products using Karl's inventions. Karl's currently working at Ravn on augmented reality headsets for the military and first responder applications. And make sure to check out his blog, KG on Tech. It's one of the most fascinating sources for information in the industry, so make sure to check it out. And then last but not least, Steinerman. Jake is the principal augmented reality engineer at PTC Vuforia as part of PTC's AR Center of Excellence Field Engineering team. His work has enabled him to explore AR in industries from autonomous vehicles to medical devices to federal aerospace and defense, all using his company's AR platform, Vuforia. I'm super excited to have you here, Jake. Thank you for joining. Get into the speeches, I just wanted to highlight a few really cool use cases of augmented reality and share some of the industry's latest news. So this is LiDAR Lab by Joshua Kaspers, and it's a great use of AR in the iPhone 12. And it uses the LiDAR scanner to scan your environment. And what you could do is drop cubes or balls into your room and see how they react to the different surfaces and the geometry. You could also use your hand to push an object and watch it move in real time. There's also haptics implemented into the app. So when you touch the ball, the phone vibrates a bit to simulate the actual physics and feeling of moving a real object. Really interesting use case of LiDAR and shows what's possible with the technology. Hopefully Joshua can speak at a future meetup. Here's another example. So you can see that they're moving the boxes with their hands. Pretty cool. The next is Golf Scope AR by Rick Messer. And it helps you visualize the green. It tells you how hard to hit, where to position your putt, and it even gives you a preview image of the slope. It's beautifully designed and will definitely serve as a killer app through an AR headset. It's just kind of difficult right now to play golf while holding your phone up. Right now, it only works with the iPhone camera, so the readings aren't too accurate. But with LiDAR information, this can for sure become a great tool for any golfer looking to improve their game. And then lastly, Facebook released a machine learning algorithm paper entitled Constraining Dense Hand Surface Tracking and Elasticity that showcases the technology which is capable of tracking hand deformations and self-occluding hand gestures for both single hands and two hands. This basically allows developers to track complex two-hand interactions in ways that weren't possible before. This is a big step in the UX for AR, as many interactions we take in the real world include our hands in self-contact, such as shaking a hand or making a fist. So that's really exciting. And just to go over some of the latest news, Nintendo revealed a Mario Kart AR enhanced roller coaster at Nintendo World Japan. The headset looks kind of like a Meta and a Mario hat. Really cool. They also released something earlier this year, Super Mario Kart AR, which turns your living room into a Mario Kart racetrack through these camera-enabled carts. Looking Glass, which is a personal holographic display, launched their second iteration on Kickstarter, and they raised almost $2 million on Kickstarter. So exciting to see how much demand there is for consumer-enabled AR and mixed reality products. And then Apple started shipping their AirPod Max headsets, which is similar to AirPod Pro's feature with the spatial audio and dynamic head tracking. So these headsets ultimately deliver an immersive audio-like experience at your home. And lastly, I just want to showcase Spatial Bliss, which is a interactive audio experience that you can use on your AirPods Pros or your AirPods Max. So it actually uses head motion tracking, so you can move your head around, add different sounds, and experience the sounds at different points in space. So really exciting to see the potential of your technology, how it's being leveraged, and I definitely recommend checking this out. Now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Avi Bar-Zeev for XR, The Eyes Are the Prize. So Avi, please go ahead and take it away from here. Thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm going to attempt to share my screen now. Let's see. I don't know how to do this. And if I hit play, you all see the white text on a black background? Does that all look good?
Yep, it looks good.
All right, I'll start. Hi, thanks for coming. It's good to see you. I'm actually not in New York. I'm all the way in California, but I grew up in New York and have a special affinity for New York and would love to get back as soon as I can. This talk is titled, For XR, the Eyes Are the Prize, and you're going to get a good glimpse as to what are the values and the merits of eye tracking, and also what are some of the major concerns, especially around certain companies who may have ad-driven business models. And I don't know if I want to single out anybody right now, but you'll get to see some of the companies that we may have some concerns about. The concerns are with the business model, not with the people. But especially after the announcement of some eye-tracked products, we're gonna need to be really careful about the rules, what we do with this data. So I appreciate the warm intro I got before. I'm gonna just cover a few things that I've done before in a little more color. Way back in ancient times, almost 20 years ago, I got a great chance to work on a Disney VR ride early on. It was kind of my first big job, and the art was amazing, and it ran on supercomputers, and it kind of looks like something you could do today on an Xbox, but it required some massive computational power to do. But we learned a lot about VR. Continuing, I got to work on Disney Quest. I was there for helping to launch a company called Keyhole early on, which became Google Earth. I got to work on Second Life as a consultant and built a lot of the code that procedurally builds the worlds that you see. I got to work on HoloLens right back at the start of it, first technical person working on it, where we had to go figure out what it was about. Why are we going to do this? What's the value? And similarly for the Echo Frames, I got to think about what's the story, why are we going to wear glasses, what's the user experience going to be like, and also got to do something similar at Apple. I can't talk about details, but my general job in most of these places is to prototype experiences early, to try them out using whatever we can use, using off-the-shelf hardware, stuff we might have to invent, but try as cheaply as possible to build the experiences that it might take $1 billion at some of these companies to reach, but do so in the order of weeks to months and really get a sense of where the value is going to be. So that's generally what I do, and it forces me to think about issues a lot earlier than other people may have to. Usually about 5 years early for some of these products. It takes a long time to go down the pipeline, and it means I get to try a lot of different technologies early and play with them and sort of get to learn what some of the pros and cons are. And I'm fortunate now I'm in a position where I get to write about it. And this is an article that I put out after I left Apple in 2019. I just put a new version up on Medium. You can see at the right-hand side of the screen. By the way, sorry about the aspect ratio. I have one of these ultra-wide monitors, so that's maybe why you're seeing such a wide display. The new article is updated to include Facebook's Aria and some new videos, some of which you'll see in this presentation as well, but if there's a few in this that I didn't post. So I'm gonna start by just starting at the beginning of human perception. And this is stuff that I've learned about in the last 5 or 10 years. I find it really fascinating because we don't think about this. We think that we have this amazing perception of everything going on around us, but the reality is our perception is incredibly limited. So the most important thing to understand about human perception, and this is going to help explain why eye tracking works and why eye tracking is kind of like mind reading. The reality is that we have a very limited high resolution vision. It only happens in what we call the fovea, which is about 5 degrees from center. Everything else is called the periphery. And the periphery is actually very low resolution, very low color as well. And so you could imagine the periphery being almost black and white. And while we look around, while our eyes dart, let's say up and down, like in this picture, we are scanning the environment and building up a mental model of what's around it. We don't see the whole world at once, but our brains see it in pieces and try to stitch it together and remember it. And there's a few really important properties of this that will come into play with the whole mind reading aspect. One is, let's see if I can skip ahead to this. There we go. So this is a video of an eye moving around. You could see what we call saccades, where the eye jumps really quickly from one position to another. It's just really an incredible organ. And during those jumps, we see, this is from a related study called redirected walking, which I'll explain in a second. The eyes jump around, and during those jumps, we're actually blind. If we weren't blind, we would probably see the world blurred about every second when our eyes move so quickly. So this is a way that our brains protect us from this rapid motion. But what happens while our eyes move is we're blind, and we can use these motions to actually change the world around us. So with the notion of redirected walking, we're going to notice whenever the eyes move. This also includes blinks is another opportunity. We can actually change the world opportunistically. And in the case of redirected walking, we're going to effectively rotate the world so that you walk in roughly a circle where you think you're walking in a straight line. So you could be in a room and feel like you're walking straight forever, but you're actually going in a circle and never hitting anything. It's really amazing this works, but it does. And one of the aspects of change blindness, here's a video that I'll show you if it plays.
I want you to watch this scene because does anyone notice anything different? What's happening here? Let's see. Does it look like the same scene to you each time it's flicking on? Are you sure? Well, let me show you what happens when I remove the blink. Every frame has a different change, things which you would never believe that you would ever miss. For example, there goes the tree. And then when I put the blank in, you can no longer see the changes. Look. Isn't that remarkable? And then I'll put it back in again. There they go.
So it's pretty amazing what can be changed while we're in saccades or when we blink. And if the computer is aware of these things, pretty much the whole world can be changed around us. And if you try to focus on something and fixate on something to notice when it changes, well, the computer probably knows that too, and it can hold that thing constant and change something else that you're not looking at. So it's very hard to defeat. This is more or less an autonomic reflex that we're fighting here. I don't know if you've noticed, but I changed the title of this slide a couple of times as well while you're watching it. This just shows us that we are effectively blind. Now, in the case of AR glasses, this is roughly what we're going to be seeing in the future. Here are our eyes. We're going to put some form of device on your face. That device is going to have cameras or some other form of trackers that track your eyes to tell where you're looking. They'll also know where they are in space with some sort of 6-degree freedom tracking. And very importantly, for the future, they'll also have scene understanding and tracking, which means we'll not only know which direction your eyes are looking, but we'll know what you're looking at, and we'll be able to understand what you're looking at, whether it's an apple or an elephant or a kid or a person, an adult. We're going to know that, and we're going to be able to measure your responses to that in real time. So the benefits of eye tracking, there are many. Foveated rendering compression is something that's been widely discussed for XR. It can save quite a lot of energy in the process. It doesn't always work as perfectly as people hope, but it can do a lot. Better user interfaces. And one of the reasons that I was trying to push for eye tracking originally for HoloLens, and it came out in version 2 that you see, is that you can imagine a whole new user interface that replaces windows and mice and uses your eyes for quite a lot of the interaction. And it becomes much more natural, much more fluid, almost as if the computer is predicting what you would want to do. It can also be used for marketing research and UX. It's being used today for studying even 2D websites. And there are a lot of health implications in terms of diagnosing early on autism, MS, Alzheimer's, and a giant list, which go to the argument that this data is actually health data, something we should be protecting as health data. So here's an example of how this might be used in marketing.
Arousal levels, and cognitive load.
All right, the volume's a little low in the video, so I'll talk over it. The idea here is that the density of the heat map that you're seeing is where the average of, let's say, 100 participants are looking at any given time. So we're getting to see what people focus on during some sort of commercial. And I assume this is a commercial for salad, though it's kind of hard to tell. But they can study this, and then they can redesign the commercial in order to make people have it have more impact. And this is really important when it comes to the question of what are the risks of ads, because we get this closed loop feedback system where we can put people in experiences and measure how they respond, and then improve those experiences over and over again to make them more and more effective. So here are some takeaways from human perception. We'll move on to the rest of the subject. Now they're giving you hopefully a pretty good basic background. So our brains are continually reconstructing the world around us that we don't see as much as we think. And the area, the circle in red is actually about the size of the area. We don't even see all these words at once. We're seeing maybe 1 or 2 words, and we're remembering the rest. We're frequently blind, and we can be easily distracted. Magicians use this all the time. They may use hand motions or where their eyes go, and they distract us to look where they want us to look. And if you can study our gaze, you can also reveal what we're thinking about, how we feel about what we're seeing. The biometric information is also really important. It's actually health data. It can be used for a lot of things, including de-anonymization of people. Just like we saw recently that motion data in VR can be used to identify somebody in less than 5 minutes. Eye gaze data will be equally powerful to identify us, not even counting iris ID, which is intentionally used to identify us, but the motion data could be used. And the sum of all this is that we can form a very robust personality profile about people, and a lot of these reactions are innate. You could imagine, for example, a company that has a like button all of a sudden winds up with an automatic like button for everything in the world. You don't have to click the button anymore. They know how you're feeling about whatever you see and what you like. And that leads us to the dark side of eye tracking, which is that we have to have better security over the biometric signatures. The data, the iris ID have to be very securely stored. Never, I would say, uploaded to the cloud. They should only ever reside on the remote device, and even then should be encrypted and protected from hacking. These closing loops in terms of studying people are really important. That it can be used to figure out what your triggers are and how to trigger you in order to get you to react emotionally. We'll talk about that more. Now, the question is, would anybody ever do this? And the reality is companies already have. We saw that Facebook already used their 2D website in order to study people without their consent, and they had to apologize for it. It was kind of an oops, we won't do that again, but we have to wonder, why not? Why wouldn't they do that again? It still happens across the web. Companies do A/B comparisons on their websites all the time without actually asking anybody. And so it's pretty normal, and unfortunately normal, for people to do it. And so what's the problem? Why is this even a concern for us? Well, I'm not going to say that advertising as a whole is bad. Many things about advertising are valuable. We can find ads that inform us, that actually, the ad may find its group of people who like a certain product, and those people might not have known about that product except for the ad. That's generally a good thing. But what we're seeing here is that ads can target us and trick us. Effectively, what's happening is we're being scanned in some way. Our behaviors are being recorded and monitored. And then somebody's using that to figure out exactly how to push our buttons and trigger us, and then using potentially that information in order to get us to act against our own interests. And if you don't think that's ever happened, think about what happened with Cambridge Analytica and the 2016 election. It was pretty well documented that people were shown ads that get them to vote for a candidate who may not have been somebody that they ultimately liked. They may have decided that in the course of 4 years, that person was not on their side. But they may have been pushed into voting for that person initially by whatever their hot button issues were. And it still happens. We've seen in whole countries where people have been disenfranchised, even for not voting in certain elections, and been tricked in many ways to do this. And if you think, well, that would never happen to me, let's think about how many of you today, how many of you eat meat, or how many of you vape, or how many of you would be convinced by a commercial that for batteries, showing that batteries are a great way to connect people. And the deeper implications of the commercial are not even quite addressed in terms of should we even be at war in other countries. You're welcome to your own opinions on that, but let's just look at how manipulative this kind of stuff can be. So here's a little video I put together.
It's from Daddy.
I love you, baby girl.
Steak. That's what a man eats.
Made from stuff guys need.
Like a man. There's no one that can relate to that better than I do, because
love you, baby girl.
I've lived in that world. Steak is for man. They showed us commercials, burgers, George Foreman with the grill, and the big sandwiches and all that stuff.
Eat like a man and be full like a man.
This is great marketing for the meat industry.
Serious man.
Selling that idea that real men eat meat.
You look like more
She'll
than
come back.
a man with a quarter pounder in your hand.
But you got to understand, that's marketing.
Oh, yeah?
That's not based on reality.
When Juul first launched, their marketing looked a lot different. When you put those ads alongside old cigarette ads, the similarities are pretty striking. Both marketed relaxation, sharing, travel, freedom, and sex appeal. It's now illegal for cigarette brands to use these kinds of suggestive advertising themes, but for e-cigarette manufacturers who had products on the market before 2016, those strategies are still unregulated. That's why a brand like Candy Pens can be promoted in DJ Khaled music videos, just like tobacco corporations used to pay stars to smoke their cigarettes on.
Okay, so you get the idea. I'm mashing up a bunch of videos just to show the emotional impact of these things can be very powerful. For me, I've never thought about the fact that my emotions were being played on to market meat to me in terms of thinking that alternatives were not as healthy or healthier. I thought I needed this stuff, and I was lied to. And that's not to say that I don't still eat meat, but I do so in much greater moderation today than I did before. So what we see is, what's sometimes been called surveillance capitalism, but I think let's just be direct about it. It's predatory capitalism. It's taking advantage of people. And all of us have vulnerabilities. None of us are superior in the sense that we can't be touched or affected by these things. And so the advertiser's job is essentially to try to make use of that. And it's happened for quite a long time. A lot of people will say, well, this has been going on forever, since the beginning of advertising. Yes, it has, but it's been crude. It's never been as refined as it is today, and it will be 100 times more refined in AR and VR because of all the data, because of all the modeling we'll be able to do on each individual person to find out what their pressure points are, what their emotional triggers are. And so we can see that what's going to be going on here is the predictive behavioral models that are being generated today in order to keep you coming back and keep you immersed in buying the things that they want you to buy are going to become better and better. And we're going to see a kind of real-time emotionally triggered advertising where you can imagine the saccadic blindness, the blinking that we talked about before, could be used, for example, to sell you a car by cycling through 100 different cars in the background of some experience without you even noticing that they're being changed, until all of a sudden they change it to the color and the make and the model that draws your eye. And they notice that's the one you looked at. You like the green Camaro. That's the one that we know you're most interested in. And you won't even notice these things are happening because of the saccadic blindness. Once we're also fully digitized, you could imagine companies starting to use our own likenesses in advertising. So now, a picture or a digital twin of a family member or somebody else you care about may be used in advertising in order to make that more emotionally appealing. And if your daughter shows you in online that she wants to get M&Ms, why would you not come home with an extra pack of M&Ms? You want to make her happy. But it's the advertising that's telling you this, not necessarily your daughter. And most importantly, this can be used to influence us at the key times, the times when we're most vulnerable. Some of us have these shields that we'll put up and we protect ourselves from being influenced, but there are times when we are emotionally triggered and we're not as well able to discern when we're being manipulated during those times. And we all have these. You can all think of hot buttons. And a good example for yourselves to imagine is, think of a time where you were feeling vulnerable, hurt, and a song came on. It could have maybe come on the radio or a playlist. And that song just had a strong emotional impact on you at that time. Well, that was probably random, right, up till today. But in the future, it might not be random. The song that comes on next could be picked in order to play to your emotional vulnerability at that time in order to steer you in a direction. And that's just one example of how we could be manipulated. Okay, and there's the daughter picture. So the core problem is these are powerful technologies. If they're used for our benefit, they will make us powerful. But if they're used against us, they can pretty much enslave us, I would argue, in ways that we may not even be able to realize are going on. And we have to make these choices knowingly. We have to know what we're getting in for. And then my opinion is that consenting adults can agree to do things that are potentially exploitive because they're adults. They can make these choices, but they just need to know what they're getting into. They need to understand that. Well, if this is all a little bit scary, the good news is there is one way that we can imagine, other than regulation, of course, and that's happening. We'll talk about that a little more in a second. There's one thing that we can do technologically that might help, which is the same technology that's building a perfect copy, a digital copy of us, could be used to protect us. We could imagine our personal digital twins knowing us so well that they know our vulnerabilities and they can protect us in much the same way that ad block software runs in a browser today. You could imagine it intercepting these attempts to manipulate us and giving us just the information we need rather than all of the extra manipulative baggage that comes with it, that may be a great way to protect us. The problem is who provides these personal digital twins. You see, a company like Facebook came out with its own VPN that really just gathered data for you. So it was ostensibly there to protect you, but it wasn't necessarily going to do that. And of course, there was a research app that Facebook put out that paid users for their data. And I think it was not as upfront as it should have been. Some of it was targeted at people who were maybe not old enough to consent. So we might ask, talking about Facebook again, and again, I remind you of the thing I said at the beginning, it's not the people at Facebook that I'm worried about, it's the business model. The business model drives good people to do things that ultimately will be manipulative because ultimately that increases the profit for the company. That's how success is measured. So over time, the safeguards are whittled away. And without external forces trying to counter that, you'll see it get worse and worse. No company's ever really been able to self-regulate and try to do the right thing unless there's been consumer pressure or regulatory pressure. So just as an example, I was at Microsoft, during Microsoft in 2008. It was a few years after the Microsoft antitrust settlement that it took 10 years to get that together. And it took another 10 for the company to really change in a meaningful way. It takes time for these things to trickle through the company. However, being under scrutiny and especially discovery by lawyers, they're going to be looking at every email ever sent, every text message that's pertained, and they're going to be much more, Facebook will be much more careful, I think, in the future. We've heard stories about how they may have run a little bit roughshod over some VR developers, and I feel really badly about that, and people have been treated unfairly if you listen to the stories. But I think that that's going to start to get better as more and more scrutiny is applied. Apparently, Oculus and Facebook Research Labs aren't directly affected by the suit. The technologies aren't really named as far as I can tell, but they still will be affected by the progress of the suit because they're part of the overall company. Most importantly, as the privacy question is addressed in trying to fix whatever's going on, I think privacy will be helped for XR. And the best outcome, I think, is that Facebook finds a better business model that isn't entirely ad-driven or maybe even barely ad-driven. I think that the company can make quite a lot of money, maybe even more money, without the dangers that we're talking about. Of course, they're not the only company. If you say Facebook, you also have to include Google, you have to include other companies, but I think Facebook is kind of the poster child for this at this point. So that's my presentation. I guess if you have a couple of minutes, I can take a couple of questions. I'm not sure how much time you want to allot, but that's what I have for you right now. So I will stop sharing so I can see you all.
Thank you, Avi. Remarkable presentation. Thanks so much for presenting. It really opened my eyes up to the fine line between a good user experience and the potential for misuse. We have time for one or two questions. This one is from Kathleen. So Kathleen asks, I thought subliminal advertising was made illegal long ago in regards to flashing products on in the middle of a movie back in the 60s. How is this still possible?
I think it's different than subliminal advertising. I'm not sure subliminal advertising really worked ever. It was one of these things that was touted as a big advance, but it was still brute force. How do you know what to put subliminally up on the screen in order to affect somebody? But I think what's going on here is more about building up the psychological model of each individual person and trying to play to that. It might not need to be flashing words on screen. It may be just subtly changing objects in the background, maybe even playing with colors and mood. These things can affect us emotionally. Of course, once companies know what triggers us, then they just need to create the right setting. And we're pretty sure that a lot of people are triggered by seeing our military out in the field and being away from family. That's going to be a near universal appeal, but they can find more targeted appeals to people who might have strong feelings on issues like abortion or things that we might be more split on, and really push those kinds of messages to each of those people individually. And it's very different, I think, than the subliminal stuff we may have heard about before.
Awesome. Thank you, Avi. And that's time. We'll move on to Karl. Thank you so much for taking the time to present. It was a really interesting presentation, and I'm happy to be part of it. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Okay, are we doing okay?
Looks good.
Okay, you want me to get, okay, let's get going. I'm probably the resident skeptic in the AR world, so I'll give you a little different view. I'm living in the reality. I'm an engineer. I like to analyze things. So I live in how are we actually going to make this stuff. I've been in hardware my whole life. So I'm into how we're going to make one of these things. My career's been basically evenly split, about 20 years with Texas Instruments. I was designing ICs, mostly silicon, most of those years involved in pixel generation. One of the earliest graphics accelerators I was behind, as well as working on things like video RAMs and things that led to synchronous DRAM. The last 20 years, give or take, I've been in startup land, so I've been almost split career now. Actually, it's a little over half now in startups, starting back in '98, working on a AR-ish like headset back in '98 using LCOS, then went to Syndiant for 7 years as a co-founder, worked my way up to, was with Navdi working on AR headsets. And then lately I've been with Ravn working on a military AR headset. Also done some technical intellectual property work, as well as was mentioned earlier, I've got about 150 US patents. So just to get you an idea who I am. Yeah. So the problem is every slideshow I ever see starts with something like Ray-Ban sunglasses, and somehow they always end up looking like HoloLens. And then the view that they show you, the beautiful view they show you, is this pristine image. Like this is a camera feed through a HoloLens 2. This is an actual image, and I did everything I could to make this image look at least as good as it looked to my eye on the HoloLens 2 through the optics. I think I've got the best pictures that have at least published and most accurate ones showing what a HoloLens 2 looks like to your eye. So this is kind of like concept, and here's reality. So this talk is about the reality of AR. What does it really mean? And I'm mostly coming at this, as I said, from an AR perspective and actually building something that somebody could put on their head. I think we have a lot of unrealistic expectations. We have people talking about these things like they're going to be the next cell phone. Great, I've lost my cursor. Let's see if I can find it someplace. Uh-oh. Oh, there we are. Okay, so you know, we've got a lot of fear of missing out, like this is going to be the next cell phone. I think those are very unrealistic and overblown at this point. We have many of our design decisions being driven by what was easy to do in VR, which is almost impossible to do in AR. AR being see-through, true see-through. You know, we get ridiculous market studies. And let me just come down to the end. We'll hit on some of this. This is like a 3-hour presentation cut down to 20 minutes. But one of the things I always like to say is there are basically no marketing police. You know, I like to take pictures. I like to show how things really work. Everyone's exaggerating, even the big companies. Sometimes they do it not because they want to, but just to keep up with what other people are saying. So why is AR so difficult? Basically, we can't put the display where we want to. VR took the good space. We'll put it right in front of your face. We'll put it about 45 millimeters away. I can put about $1's worth of cheap optics in front of each eye, and I can make a pretty decent looking display. That was basically the secret of Oculus, the original Oculus Rift. Cheap display, cheap optics, easy to do. The problem is with AR, we got to put the display someplace out of the way, and we somehow got to route the light from the display over to the eye. Got to route it over to the eye, and you got to be able to see through it without screwing up the guy's view of the real world. That's where things get tricky. You know, it's easy to get a large field of view with a big display, really hard to get a large field of view with a small display. Plus, we want this thing to be small and light. And what's very important here is physics. The wavelengths of visible light are fixed by whoever you believe, but they're about half a micron. And we're talking pixels on some of these displays that are less than 10 microns. So we're talking about single digit, usually integer multiples of the wavelengths of light. So things are really tiny already. Transparency makes everything much harder. Transparency makes things very inefficient, extremely. Like most AR headsets, from the light that comes out the display to the light that gets to your eye, is by a factor of at least 10, and in some cases more than 1/5,000 of the light or less makes it to your eye from what comes out the display. Whereas in the case of a VR display, hey, we're shooting it right in your eye. Basically, all the light of the display heads towards your eye. Transparency makes things really hard. And on top of this, people want it to look good, as if it's not enough. The basic thing goes on here, and I show on the, I show over here, this is a very generic optical issue. We have a display device that's too close to the eye for you to be able to focus. So what we'd have to do is we have to put optics in front of the display so you can see it when you focus. At the same time, we have the real world we want to combine and get to your eye, and yet we don't want to mess it up too much. And so things get really tough when we do all this. So this is kind of the generic problem. We've got to move focus for that without screwing up the view of the real world and route it to your eye. And the light losses that we get from the display to your eye are not 79%. It's really sometimes more than 1/5,000, less than 1/5,000 of the light actually makes it to your eye with some of these, particularly these waveguides. Just real quickly, what we mean by magnification, I did a short thing here, but I basically took a picture where I put the camera at a very high F number so I could keep everything in focus and not have the focus change. But I took a picture from the distance of the 25 centimeters, which is where we normally measure magnification. I just want to show this with a VR type setup. But basically what you find is that if you look at a typical VR configuration, you get about 3.5x the magnification, or 70% of the magnification is just due to the display being located so close to your face. Only about 30% of the magnification actually comes from the optics. So the optics are mostly there to do focus, not really to magnify the image. We make the image bigger by moving it closer to your face. The problem we have with AR is we want to put that thing way around the corner, back on the temple or up above your head or someplace else. And so the display is far from your eye. And to start with, the display is really, really, really tiny, and we want to make it big. So that's kind of the fundamental physics problem we have, is that all the easy basically VR with a big old headset takes all the easy gets in doing the optics and display and everything. And AR has everything hard to do. They got to put the display further away from the eye than they want. The display's too small. And you got to now figure out a way to magnify it. The easy way to magnify is to move a display closer to the eye and put some optics so you can focus. But we can't do that either for all these other reasons. So AR gets the hard slog. Another big thing, and this is one that you fundamentally can't get away from, is that what we want to do is light rays go in straight lines. So if we want a big field of view, and we want some eye relief being that the display that we want the thing away from your eye. In most cases, we like it far enough away you could wear your own glasses, but that makes things even worse. Because light moves in a straight line, the field of view starts dictating how big this thing may be. And then we talk about an eye box. Eye box is so your eye can move around. If you ever seen, if you ever looked at a laser, some of the, who is it? Oh God, forget off the top of my head. But anyway, if you look at like laser scanning directly into the eye, you see there's no eye box. So if you want an eye box, you now have to make the displayable light rays even bigger, that kind of volume. Anyway, what happens is that we now have to get this last optical element, whatever it is shooting those light rays to your eye. If I want to hit this corner of the eye to fill the field of view, I now have to have an optics element at the last end that's at least as big as that angle at the distance it's going to be away, plus whatever I need for the eye box. That drives these needs for very large optics for large field of view. One of the ways around this is what we call pupil replication. If we look at what an eye box is, if you think about it, imagine that this was a mirror. So I have a mirror here, and I'm going to like move my head. So if I move my head or eye, this thing starts to cut off. So a bigger mirror in this case would be a bigger eye box. You can move your head around a bit and still see the image, even if that. Well, the other way to go, and the way to go without making big mirrors and big optics, is to go with pupil replication. And with pupil replication, this is an example of a reflective one. I imagine I have a series of 30% mirrors. If I move my eye, as the eye is moving, it still sees the same brightness image, and it sees one image. Ideally, there could be problems if these things aren't aligned perfectly, then you might see a double image. But if in the ideal example, what you do is you see a single image, even if you move your eye. So this is one way to make the eye box bigger. In the case of diffractive waveguides, such as Hololens and whatnot used, they replicate, they are kind of doing this on a very micro scale, but much more massively. So they got a massive amount of replication of the pupil, so that now when your eye moves around, you see the image kind of wherever you move it. One of the problems with diffractive waveguides is they use diffraction, and diffraction works by bending light based on wavelength. Well, so what happens is you tend to get spread. You tend to get also the thing called order. Only one part of the light goes in the direction you want. The rest of the light goes in another direction. In this case, we get the famous eye glow. When you look just right, you see it. There's as much light going away from the eye as there is light going towards your eye in these things. So anyway, so you get into pupil replication. The other thing we have, and I won't get too much into étendue because that could be all night. But basically, étendue is the killer of optical dreams. It's a principle of physics that basically says that light rays, you can take a small light source, and as you move towards make the optics move it around. If I go through a bunch of optics and bring the light rays back to the same size area, the randomness will be at least as random or more random than before. So it's because there's always some loss, there's always some scatter and whatnot. So light always tends towards randomness as we go. And so it gets to be really hard to get light funneled into a small, what this really comes down to is it's very hard to get light into a very small hole. It's like a funnel, and you just can't pump the light through it. You can't get the light to go through it. I think we'll skip through this one. Yeah, let's go back to pupil expanding waveguides. That's the really popular thing. You see these on HoloLens, Magic Leap, Vuforia, whatnot. You also have pupil expanding waveguides with Loomis, although it's done in a different mechanism other than diffraction. The problem you have is, this étendue coupling comes in that we can't get the light into the little tiny hole in. It's really nice for building a small optical engine, but we can't get the light into the hole. And then we're going to take that light and we're going to spread it out over a very large area. So it's really counterproductive. We pump light into a little tiny hole, and we lose a lot of that light due to étendue. And then we turn right around and blow the light up, which now is reducing the brightness by the ratio of the size of area we put in versus the size of area we put out. When we get done with all that, we might get less than 1/5000. If we look at the nits going in, the brightness going in versus the brightness going out, that reduction is on the order of 5,000 to 1. That's a pretty big killer of light. The other thing that, and this was pointed out by several people, but we do get this field of view obsession. What happened is VR got there first, and people got drunk on wide field of view, and they think 90, and they think, well, I know what field of view is. I want more, and a 90 is not enough. I need 100, 110. Well, that's fine for the VR guys. They can start tilting the display sideways and make it and whatnot. But if you're building AR, you've got real problems routing that light, making a big enough satellite, and then getting it into your eye. That's a big problem. And it's been pointed out by some people, really in a lot of, and the Thad Starner's a big one of this. I took some of this information actually from his presentation in 2019 at Photonics West, is that you really need to start thinking about what you really do. You realize that you go to a movie theater, if you sit in the best seat in a movie theater, you're looking at about a 30 to 35 degree field of view. That's all you see in a movie theater. That screen is huge, so you can put a big audience in there. He makes a big point about that. The other thing is you start putting too much content up there, you're actually blocking the guy's hands. If your goal is to show a guy where to put a screw in, and yet you put all this crap up there, you're actually blocking their ability to do work. So we do tend to I think that in today's world, we're making an impossible problem by putting impossible requirements on a lot of AR headsets. This is just up here real quick. This is a Bosch's laser beam scanning. Very similar. I don't know why. They were just bought by Google. I don't know why. It just skipped my head. But anyway, you know, this is the image you're getting to the eye, and this is very close to the image you got with the earlier ones. North Focals, sorry. North did the same kind of thing, basically a kiss off of this. The problem is there's like no eye box. What you see here is a guy custom fitting this to the person's head. They've got little space bars here. They've got to exactly get this to your head. The eye box is near zero. The eye box is as big as your pupil. So it's a few if your pupil moves by 1 pupil diameter, which is easy to do when you move your eyes even, and no less if you joggle your glasses or whatnot. Moving by 1 pupil, you lose it altogether. So this is a problem with some things. I've done some comparisons. I've looked at transmissivity. You know, this is a problem also socially. As you start to lose transmissivity, you start to, like I say, like Loomis is pretty good at about 80, 85%. Magic Leap was blocking 85% of the light. It's nearly VR. I always say it's like 85% VR. But various guys do that. Nreal is about 30% transmission, Hololens about 40%. That means you're not clear. By the way, in the world of optics, people tend to think of things as being clear when they're 80 or 85% transmissive. When you start getting below that, you're no longer really clear. You're starting to look like sunglasses. Way too many different optics to mention, but the ones that get all the attention these days are diffractive grating, diffractive waveguides. There are other things like with mirrors, there's Loomis. You've got optics like freeform. Lasers come in 2 flavors these days. We have direct laser scanning. That's like North and Bosch, where they kiss off of a hologram to bend the light in the eye. And then we have things like HoloLens. Next, we have, you know, we can do refractory optics with beam splitters. We can do cheap, which is bird bath, which have their drawbacks. There's one of the ones I like a lot these days, a small company out of Israel called Orim. They've got something with what I call a super slanted beam splitter. It's kind of neat. It still has the issue that the optics get big because you got to locate the optics a ways away. So to make any kind of field of view, the optics tend to get big. The image quality is pretty good, though. We'll skip through there. Yeah, this back to concept and reality. This is a series, and you look on my website more about this. But Magic Leap is what happened if you had a $3 billion Kickstarter, I like to say. It's really embarrassing how little they knew about what they were doing and how bad it was. The more I learned, the more upset I got. But I've done a whole series on them. Probably best left to the website to get into detail and look at pictures. I've also looked at it, did a comparison, a shootout of HoloLens 1, Magic Leap, and Loomis. the Loomis waveguides, if they can make them, are phenomenally better. What this is almost belying them, because this is them at 2x. This is these other guys showing nominally less than about 1,000 pixels wide, but they're showing 2K wide. So this is really 4 times the resolution on the Loomis one, and better definition. What's interesting, HoloLens 1 used LCOS, and I've got a history with LCOS, but it's not about LCOS versus other stuff. But I'm just saying, I happen to know a lot about it. But HoloLens 1 used LCOS. On HoloLens 2, they went to laser scanning. They claimed higher resolution, but by any objective measure, the resolution is just horrible on HoloLens 2. It also does a lot of flicker. There's a lot of things that I was taught growing up, and back in the 80s even, that you shouldn't do with the display. It has both 30 hertz and even 15 hertz flicker in it. But anyway, this kind of shows HoloLens 1. So in terms of real resolution, HoloLens 2 went backwards. Now it's much better in almost every other aspect. You know, the motion tracking, the input, the fit and function, and everything else is vastly better. But in terms of image quality, it's a huge step backwards in terms of resolution and just about any way you can measure image quality. It's got wiggles in it. The resolution is bad. And this is as good as you can make it look. I won't get into all the details other than point back to my blog. I have a whole series of articles on how HoloLens 2 works. It's a very messy scanning process. These are actually freeze frames. It actually puts up at 120 hertz, it puts up 4 different color fields plus a bunch of minor fields. And then that all gets kind of mixed together to your eye. And it's a flickering mess as far as I'm concerned. The big one these days that everyone talks about is micro LED. They're the big promise. And there is a lot of good things happening with micro LEDs, but they're nowhere near ready yet, particularly color. The only guy showing color is Stendo. They're the only one to do a full color. It's at fairly low resolution, and it's not in production yet. Jaybird is way ahead in terms of getting to production, but they're still single color. One thing I will also note, I've also looked at Plessy, is they're also all very, very, very noisy. And the other part that people don't talk about is the sophistication of the backplane or the silicon driving it. Some of the drive schemes that these guys have are very primitive, resulting in a lot of complexity upstream in order to get the display to it. One other thing kind of interesting, DigiLens just did a paper a few months ago now, but what they did is they're using laser illuminated LCOS. What they're doing is they're actually got lasers going into a series of waveguides, and then these waveguides are being used to direct the light from the 3 lasers onto the LCOS and back. Ends up in a very small unit, and they do have some working things going. Prototypes going with this scheme of using waveguides to combine lasers to illuminate LCOS. So this is laser illuminated LCOS as opposed to laser beam scanning. This concept actually is not at all old. The idea of combining using waveguides. Vuzix actually in their video kind of hints at it, that they're going to looking at doing that with micro LEDs. And I have a rule of thumb that says, in AR, if you can dream of it, Facebook's already tried it. It's just unbelievable how many things between the papers, the presentations, and the patents that they file. You can almost look at somebody thinks they've come up with a new idea, and you just go looking and you see, well, when did Facebook try it? Because this is a patent on a similar concept where they're going to use, these are 3 micro LEDs with waveguide for combining. So towards the end here, this here is this is a work in progress. But what I try to do is map out like what are the AR displays? I like to say, well, what displays go with what optics? And it's not you just can't take I like that optics and I'm going to put it with that display. You have to kind of say these displays work better or worse. And, LCOS and DLP have been used with waveguides and work fairly well. Laser beam scanning is being used with waveguides. That's obviously with HoloLens. One of the big issues here is that micro LEDs have a real problem. Going back to that, without getting all the details, that étendue issue, they have some real issues working with people expanding waveguides. You can't get that light coupled in very well, and that's the big issue right now. That's one of the reasons why people are looking at lasers again. Laser image quality is so far has been absolutely abysmal compared to the other technologies. So what happens is you kind of take your chances, choose your poison, and see what problems you get. So this is kind of a map I'm working on to kind of map where displays go to what kind of optics. Another thing I like to say is there's at least 20 or 30 things you're trying to solve simultaneously. And almost every time you try to improve one thing, like whether it's transparency or brightness or some other factor, often improving one aspect has severe negative problems on the other. So you can't solve a problem by saying, and this is why when Magic Leap was making their pronouncements, I knew it was, right off the bat, before I ever looked in detail at them, I said, I know it's not true. And the reason why is that even if they had solved one thing really, really well, they had like 19 more to go. So I kind of put up here the whole thing. Anyway, this is kind of like my and this list keeps varying, but I've been putting this list out for about 3 or 4 years in various forms and keep adjusting it and fiddling it. So kind of wrapping up here, where AR might work. So I've given you a lot of reasons why it's not going to happen or why people are overblowing what's going to happen. There are some reasons for AR to work. HoloLens is finding real uses. We're starting to see, you get the feel that they're selling stuff, mostly in the enterprise field, mostly to people. But the issue comes down to areas where hands-free operation has a high value. And as I said, the number one way I think HoloLens sells is you tell the guy, hey, yeah, it may cost $3,000 for this plus several thousand for software and all that. But if I can save you just a small amount of time, I can justify the cost. That works. That's a pretty good sales pitch for a guy working on a factory floor, paying a loaded technician or engineer over $100,000 a year, including all their benefits and the equipment. Life saving. So we have the first responders, medical, and whatnot. Very importantly, the image quality does not, if you need great image quality, you're not going to get it. It's not for looking at photos. It's not for looking at movies. It's for putting a little dot on the screen, telling the guy what to do. A little bit of content that's really important when you need your hands free. The content is generally going to be sparse. If you're trying to fill up the view with a movie, then you're not doing AR. You're much better off with either looking at your phone or a VR headset. How you look doesn't matter. This is the other big trick the thing that HoloLens kind of realized over, say, Magic Leap. Magic Leap went kind of half-assed. They kind of went for looks, kind of went for make it work, and kind of ended up with neither. But if you go with HoloLens, you say, well, it's going to be big and ugly, and if I need a strap over the head, that's the way it is. You want a large eye relief. This is another area where HoloLens, by comparison, blew away Magic Leap. Magic Leap went for make it a little smaller. You can make the optics smaller. Everything gets better if you put it closer to the eye. But if you do that, you give up eye relief. And if you give up eye relief, you can't wear glasses. Once you can't wear glasses, now all of a sudden your population of who can wear it and whatnot goes down. And now you got this mess of, you got to get prescription lenses. Oh God, you've made it where you can't use it reliably except in a very customized situation. Also, a big thing is low amount of input required. In spite of all the things they're doing with input devices like wrist detection and all that, HoloLens 2 is massively better than HoloLens 1. but it's still you're still not going to type a letter on it. You might get away and enter at least like you can enter the code, your code for your router, but you're not going to want to use this to type a letter. Maybe a short tweet, but that's about it. And it's usually not truly portable, but really wireless working in a confined area. So that's about it. That's probably about, like I say, 3 hours kind of crammed down.
Thank you, Karl. Always nice hearing a realistic view of the current inflated state of the industry. Just want to open up the floor for one or two questions. Okay, looks like Sayad Khan wants to know, can you mention if pixel-wise hard edge occlusion is a must for AR optical see-through?
That's an excellent question. It's actually way up on the list. If that's a requirement, then it's never happening. Hard edge occlusion in AR, with true AR, not VR pass-through AR, but in true AR, hard edge occlusion may violate laws of physics. I've heard people say they can. I've heard one guy someplace said they can do it, but I call it perpetual motion until I've seen it. Hard edge occlusion is an extremely hard problem. The part that people miss is focus. I always say these things always seem that people come up with the idea. For example, if I put an LCD display, if I draw a dot on a pair of glasses that's the size of 1 pixel, you won't even know it's there. If you ever looked in a lens of a camera, you might see in good optics, you'll see little bubbles in it. You don't know they're there because the light rays are just going around that. If you don't bring it into focus, and I suggest you look, and I think I've put it on my website, hard edge occlusion, but there's a thing from the University of Arizona. They did a thing, and you can see how big and bulky it gets, and it only works at 1 focus distance. If you want the general case where I can block anything in the real world at any distance, I think you need an infinite amount of hardware to do that. So it's not happening.
Thank you, Karl.
Almost all occlusion these days is won by what we call dominance, where you just blast over it.
Thank you, Karl. I just have one more quick question, and then we'll move on to the next presentation. This is from our host, Jason Jaslow, so I wanted to get the chance to ask you, do you think real-world pass-through video is a better solution than transparent optics?
Another excellent question. The answer, I always say that almost everything that's easy in pass-through AR is hard in optical AR, and vice versa. The problem you have with pass-through is you've got that delay, whatever the electron to photon delay. You got to take a camera and you got to delay to get it to the eye, and that's a real problem. In military applications, they're still using photomultiplier tubes for night vision because even that little bit of delay, with everything they can afford in the military, that little bit of delay is too much for them. So that's one problem. The other problem is focus. Remember, you have kind of that inverse focus problem. Well, hard edge occlusion is easy in pass-through AR. Now the world is not focused right. The world is now focused at a given plane. So now when you look out there, everything in the world is focused at the same point. It doesn't vary in focus the way it does in the real world. So that's the problem. So then we say, oh, well, we'll just put a light field camera up there. So we'll put a light field up there. So now I can now have focus. So I'm going to do a light field camera, and now I can focus the world. That's fine, but I don't think that's happening for 20 or 30 years, maybe at best. So the problem is that things that worked in the real world, like with pass-through, everything's real. Oh, and by the way, your vision, you still got peripheral vision and everything. There's just so many things that do better in AR that don't do good in VR, but they don't, that's almost an exact opposite. It's almost like an XOR function where one works and the other doesn't.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Karl. It was great to have you on. I really always enjoy reading your blog. So, and I posted it in the comments. So if you haven't had the chance to read it, definitely check it out. And thanks again for coming on. Excellent presentation. Now I'm excited to see some real life applications of augmented reality. So it's a privilege to welcome Jake Steinerman on for his presentation. Thank you so much, Jake.
Yeah, you bet. Happy to be here. Thanks for the invite. Let me know if this is looking good. Get a thumbs up or something like that. Looks good. Cool. Yeah, thanks for the invite, Andy and team. So I'm from, like Avi, I'm from New York originally myself, born and raised in New York, in Woodmere, Long Island, but live in the DC area these days. I'm so excited to kind of reconnect with my US roots in New York. So thanks for the opportunity. So I'm going to be talking about how we at PTC are using LiDAR, and which is becoming more and more prevalent today, to power spatial AR experiences. So just a little bit about myself. So I started my career about 8 years ago. Actually worked for a company I didn't expect to work for, Dow Chemical. They make a lot of materials and products that go into products that you use every day. I actually worked on the digital side. I know nothing about chemistry, but worked and started the first AR VR team at Dow, where we implemented a lot of different projects with augmented and virtual reality. And that's where I actually, as a developer, got introduced to PTC, which is the parent company of Vuforia. I think everyone in the AR community knows Vuforia, which has been around. We just had the 10-year birthday of Vuforia, but PTC acquired Vuforia a number of years ago, and we built it into a larger platform. And then I got my degree from University of Michigan in social computing, informatics. I actually had a dream back then to work for Facebook and kind of build out social networking and things like that. It's a very different world these days. Luckily, I've been able to pivot into AR and VR. I chose to mention Michigan specifically last because I noticed when I was kind of going through the speaker list that we have a really interesting panel. That Karl and myself are both Wolverines, and we have one Ohio Stater. So thankfully, this week, we didn't have to play our football game, so I can brag a little bit that we have more Wolverines than Buckeyes here today. We played this week. I would not have mentioned this at all because I know it wouldn't have gone well for us. So go blue. So when it comes to Vuforia, for those who are familiar with Vuforia, we have a lot of different target types, a lot of different ways to attach content to the world. Most people use and are familiar with image-based targeting, image-based augmented reality. You point your device at an image that you've built into your app to say, I want to recognize this movie poster, and have the movie poster come alive or have something pop out of it. We have a whole host of ways to do that. It's still like a really popular way to create AR experiences. It's really the simplest, the most accessible. So there's a whole host of ways to do that, either through standard image targets. We introduce multi-image targets. So you can track like a cereal box, view marks for tracking QR codes embedded into images, really popular, toys and sales and marketing. But what I really wanted to focus on was something we introduced actually earlier this year, was area targets. And what I'm going to talk about relates a little bit as well to model targets. That's the ability to recognize real world objects, so cars, machinery, equipment, any physical object in the real world, and then track that. And then area targets is really the idea of being able to track not an object or an image, but actually track an entire space, an entire room. And that just opens up a whole host of possibilities and really lowers the barrier to delivering an AR experience. And the way we're doing that is through leveraging 3D scans of spaces, of areas, particularly indoor spaces, and then using that for tracking. So we have various 3D scanners that we support, and I'll get into that, that you can use to create those 3D meshes, those 3D scans, and use that as your anchor point. So instead of pointing my phone or my headset at a particular anchor point or particular image on the wall to localize myself, all I have to do is point my device or point myself at the space in general, and I can localize within that space. So everything from a room in an apartment to an entire factory, We actually just started a project internally where we're scanning an entire airport and building out an experience within Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam as well. Fortunately, I don't have any visuals for that, but that's an exciting project that we're starting to work on. First, I wanted to kind of just give a quick definition of LiDAR for those who don't know, and Karl and Avi, you guys are probably much better at explaining this than me. So if you have a better explanation, definitely feel free to step in. But LiDAR is light detection and ranging. And really the concept is pretty simple. You have a light source, say your iPhone or device, sends out that light from that device, hits an object, comes back to that device. And you're essentially measuring the amount of time it takes from that light to leave that device and then hit an object and come back to it. It's used really a lot in autonomous vehicles today. There's a lot of different autonomous vehicle companies that are using it for mapping an environment. It's also been used for a long time in topography mapping with aircraft and mapping kind of the 3D topography essentially. But now, these sensors are becoming much smaller, much more accessible. Obviously, the new iOS devices have them built in. So what does that open up in terms of what we're able to do with those sensors? So when we think about the use cases here for this, there's two that really kind of jump out immediately. The first is in context information. How can we deliver information that's relevant to you as a user, not just as a user, but also in the space that you are. So say from a consumer app kind of perspective, when I want to get recipe information for something I'm cooking, I only want to see that information when I walk into the kitchen. Or if I have repair information for my car, how to change the oil in my car, I only want to see that when I walk into the garage of my car, as an example. So how do you deliver that without, again, having to scan a QR code or scan the car itself? My device knows where I am throughout a space. And the other kind of goes hand in hand with that is guided navigation or indoor navigation. But being able to deliver those dynamic wayfinding experiences without needing things like beacons or, again, other kinds of anchor points or markers within the space. You can leverage the space itself without having to modify it. So there's a number of devices out there today that we're actually supporting to do this, and I'm going to go in a minute on how you can actually create these kinds of experiences. The first is obviously the new LiDAR devices from Apple, the iPad Pro, which came out earlier this year, and the iPhone 12 Pro, which came out, I think, a couple of weeks ago or a month or two ago. Time flies in quarantine times. So that's one device we support, and it's obviously it's been one of the most requested devices for us to support because it's, of course, the most accessible. Then we actually started with this area targets capability. We started initially with the Matterport Pro 2. Now, I will point out that is not a LiDAR device. It's actually a structured light sensor device. So it operates a little differently, but still gives you a similar result for our tracking purposes in terms of a mesh of a space. And what we're going to be supporting really soon, I believe in starting first quarter next year, is a couple of other devices, LiDAR devices, those being Naviz and Faro. And since at PTC, we operate, most of our customers are really in the industrial manufacturing space. So they're looking into mapping really large spaces, entire factories and manufacturing operations. So devices like Naviz and Faro allow us to map those really large spaces. Whereas the Matterport, and Matterport as an organization was really, and the device itself was really designed for mapping homes, for real estate, things like that. So you're, on the scale of 2,000 to 3,000, up to 10,000 square feet. And the LiDAR on the iOS devices is really intended for even smaller spaces, more mapping your immediate surroundings. So on the scale of up to, say, 1,000 square feet, 500 to 1,000 square feet. Whereas, Naviz and Faro are much higher than that, 30,000 square feet plus, almost unlimited in terms of how much of a space you can map. I have another point here. There it goes. So Navis is really great because it allows you to really quickly capture up to 30,000 square meters. So that's even higher, 100,000 square feet spaces, and allows you to do that quickly because it's this mobile platform. So you can just walk along with it, and it'll be capturing the space as it walks with you on wheels. So you can scan at the speed of walking. So it's great for large areas and moving quickly. The Faro is really great because it gives you this really high precision and detailed scans. So if you really needed an accuracy within a millimeter, or in scanning up to even to a range from 0.5 meter to 350 meters, but with the caveat that it's a stationary sensor, so it's a little harder not as quick to build those scans, but you get a more detailed scan. So those will be scanners that we'll be supporting in the future. But I'm going to really focus right now on what most people have or could have in their pocket, and that's the iOS devices. So what we introduced to allow developers, allow users to take advantage of this capability and build out applications is the Area Target Creator app. So it's an app on the App Store. You open it up on your iPad Pro or iPhone 12 with LiDAR, and you can start scanning a space. So you open it up, you'll start seeing, you can start painting the walls, painting the floor, and building out a map of that space. So you're actually building out a mesh of that space using LiDAR. You can scan, we set a limit of 5 minutes. It's not necessarily a space limitation. It's more a time limitation because of memory limits. You don't want to hit up and fill up the space on your device too quickly, because those can get fairly large fairly quickly. So we kind of set a de facto limit of 5 minutes. But it makes it really easy to create those scans on your device. You're not having to, of course, get a large expensive scanner like the Faro or Navis can run you $30,000, $60,000. An iPhone or an iPad is $1,000, and something you probably already have, and you can walk around and map that space really quickly. So in terms of the process of how you actually, and this is a little technical, a little more for the developers out there, but the process of actually creating these targets and these experiences is, of course, first scanning that space with an iPad, and actually within that Area Target Creator app as well, it's going to generate a database of your space on that device and allow you to test it as well. So you're seeing here after, I lost my mouse there. There it is. What you're seeing here is after I do a scan, I then got the opportunity to test it and kind of see the tracking. So we then take that mesh that gets generated by the generator itself, and then overlays it on your space. So you can have a set of various databases. Maybe you've scanned a number of different spaces, and then you can see and demonstrate how well that tracking is doing by overlaying that mesh that gets created, kind of an outlined version of that mesh on the real space. But what also happens is on the app itself, on the device itself, we can produce that area target generation. So we're building out a database that really consists of an XML and a database file that includes kind of key points in that scan to help define the mesh and key points in that mesh for our computer vision to recognize its space itself. So you're generating it all on the device. What I have here in this kind of what I would say the next step is processing that scan. So actually running it through our algorithm, taking that mesh and saying, let's find the key points in that scan to generate a mesh from it. Here in this video here, it might be a little hard to see over the video. This is actually the desktop version of that. So if you're using, say, a Matterport or one of the other scanners, one of the more robust scanners, you would actually bring that through a desktop tool to do that generation. But it can all happen in a matter of minutes. And then when you get an output of is that XML file, a database file, but also all of what you need packaged up into a Unity file. And that, again, this happens whether you're using an iOS device or the Matterport or a desktop tool. And then, since you have this Unity package file, you can take it and just drop it and import it right into a Unity project. I'll kind of skip ahead here. Depending on the size of the scan, it might take a couple of minutes. But then when you bring that into Unity, you can see the full scan of what you just did, that entire space. So you get a preview of that. It'll create a GLB file that you can use to preview and kind of build your experience relative to that space. So you're kind of, you can build, we've had people building games, more industrial types of experiences. Once it's in Unity, the sky's the limit in terms of what you want to create. But what gets really interesting is, since now we have, we've given our AR application an understanding of our space, where the walls are, where the floors are, and things like that, we can then use that for things like mesh colliders. For, if we wanted balls to bounce around and bounce off the real world walls, we know where the actual walls are, so we can do that. Or if we wanted to use it for occlusion, for having, say, AR objects hide behind a real wall, now we can deliver that. And since we're building it in Unity, you don't need to be using a device that's building, say, a mesh in real time on that device, like a HoloLens or Magic Leap. You can deliver occlusion experiences that utilize occlusion and almost seemingly real-time mesh colliders on all kinds of devices, from 5-year-old Android phones and iPhones to those more advanced, wearable devices like HoloLens and things like that. So you can have really powerful experiences on older devices. So again, opens up a whole host of possibilities of what you can do, since now you have an understanding of the space, of the room itself. There's a whole tutorial we put together as well. So if you want like a detailed kind of step-by-step of how to do what I just talked about, we've got a detailed tutorial that walks you through all that. So you can just search for how to create area targets, and it's a really great video. And we've got tons of documentation on our website as well. A couple of examples. So it's not just like theory and cool stuff. So a couple of examples of this being actually used. One example is company Evonik. So they're using it for that in-context data use case, but also for a little bit of interior navigation. So here you can see an engineer. He needs to do an inspection of the space. He needs to also track real-time monitoring of how this plant is operating. So just by walking into that space, holding up his iPad, it instantly recognizes where he is, where he needs to go. Say, I need to go over to this particular component, check how it's operating, do an inspection of it, make sure it's in the state that it needs to be in, do a visual inspection of it, and it'll give him those guidance arrows based on where he is. So kind of building a real-time nav mesh based on his location and based on the layout of the space. Then he can actually go to that location and do that visual inspection. So say he's new, or maybe he's not, maybe he was just recently trained and doesn't remember particular steps. He can get that information in real time. What you also saw there a little bit of as well was that spatially aware kind of was the inspection information, but also the ability to leave spatially aware like sticky notes or other notes and things like that. So he can go and do an inspection and say, hey, this piping wasn't, or this nozzle wasn't closed properly the way it should have been. And he can leave a note for the next guy who comes in, maybe runs the night shift. And he can, when he arrives at that physical location, he can get a history of how that particular area is performing, or what happened in the last inspection. So giving him only the information he needs, where and when he needs it. This other example here is actually kind of a fun one. So this is GuideBot. So this was done for indoor navigation at museums. So they built a whole map of the museum using a Matterport scanner. They're actually going to be rebuilding that map with, I believe, the Faro scanner as well. So as a visitor to this museum, you can say, hey, I want to go see some art from the 18th century, or whatever it might be. And you have your own personal guide bot assistant that'll take you exactly to where you need to go, maybe give you some interesting information or facts about that particular piece of art or historical artifact. And there's no relocalizing as you move, like come over here, scan this art so I know where you are, or scan this marker on the floor or anything like that. As soon as I bring up my phone, it'll say, all right, I know where you are based on the geometry of this the room you're in. Now I can take you to where you need to go because I understand where you are. So that's kind of a little glimpse into area targets. Yeah, let me know if there's any questions.
Thank you, Jake. Excellent presentation. I look forward to seeing how the area target pushes the AR industry forward for both consumer and enterprise. It seems like really exciting technology, and I can't wait to try it out myself. I have a question from Bar-Zeev. He would like to know if you could map a defined outdoor area as well, like a ballpark, a field, or a stadium.
Sure, yeah, that's a great question. So our goal in the initial use case when we built area targets was really for indoor spaces. And the primary reasons for that was it's because with outdoor spaces, you have all kinds of lighting conditions that you have to deal with. And it becomes very difficult to track spaces under dynamic lighting conditions. So say, at sunrise or sunset, the sun's going to be in a different area, and that's going to, for lack of a better term, confuse the computer vision as to the layout of a space and things like that, especially on devices that don't have LiDAR for mapping in 3D. If you're going off of just kind of old-fashioned computer vision recognizing spaces through the processing that we're doing. So really the focus here is in indoor spaces.
Awesome. Thank you, Jake. And just one more question, and I know we're running a bit late on time. Maggie wants to know, what is the largest area that can be mapped out with Vuforia?
Yeah, so with the new scanners, the Pharaoh and the Nav, it's probably upwards. I don't know if we've tested this large yet. Unfortunately, we've been kind of locked to. I've been doing most of my testing on my apartment, so I myself haven't been able to test on too many spaces. But it should be upwards of 30,000 square meters, which would be 100,000 square feet, if not larger than that. With some of these new and advanced scanners, I don't think there's really a technical limitation. Even from a computer vision perspective and a mapping perspective, there's no technical limitation to really how large you can get for indoor spaces.
Awesome. Thank you, Jake. It was so nice to hear from you. It was really nice to hear to Avi and then go to Karl and to you, Jake. It was a nice progression of presentations, and I'm extremely happy that you were all able to join us. I would or over time, but I'd love to do breakout rooms for 2 minutes with the panelists if you guys are cool with it. If you're lucky enough, you'll end up in a room with one of them. I think it will be just an incredible way to facilitate connections. They'll only be about like 2 or 3 minutes, and then we will close the meeting. But I'll separate everyone into breakout rooms now. Don't be too scared. Everyone's pretty nice here. So let's see. I'm going to separate. So there's going to be around 2 to 3 participants per room. If you'd like, you can discuss how are you implementing augmented reality in your life, and I'll give you about 2 minutes. Dun, 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 dun. looks like we might have had a few technical difficulties during the breakout room. Some people ended up in the room alone. So hopefully you enjoyed your own company and people are still rolling in. Looks like the breakout room just ended. Sorry about that if you ended up alone, Avraham. And thank you. Gene was also an empty breakout room. All right, still working out kinks here, but definitely worth a shot. So thanks again, Avi. Thank you, Karl. Thank you, Jake. You are all leaders and experts in the industry. So to have you on the meetup was an honor and a privilege on my end. So thank you for presenting. And everyone, if you'd like to follow Avi, Karl, or Jake on Twitter, you have some more of their information. So thanks. And I'll be signing off on the meeting in a few minutes. So feel free to send any last messages. But thanks again. It was really a nice event. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Thanks, Andy, so much. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you, guys.